Hello, hello. This is Janet Rodriguez coming to you from my office in downtown Washington. In the times of coronavirus, we were not able to do this on campus as we were supposed to, but here we are. And joining me, as you can see on the screen, is Ed O'Keefe from his car. Hi, Ed. How is the coronavirus treating you?
Good to see you. I'm hiding from my children. Don't worry, folks. It's not like I'm living in my car. I'm just, this is the quietest spot I could find for this. And frankly, it's a nice break from the kids.
So we thank you very much. And we thank the audience very much for joining us tonight. These are tough times. We were really hopeful to be on campus to continue on with the seminar series, but here we are and we have to go on. The primaries are still going on, right, Ed? So that hasn't stopped either, but much different than we even thought last time we saw each other at the last seminar. And many of you have asked me what happened to poor Vaughn. He was following the campaign of Pete, Major Pete. He's now home, he's safe, he's off the road, and so are you, Ed. What has happened to you in the past week, 2 weeks? What our world has been turned upside down. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I keep thinking this is the campaign that just won't that just won't happen, because most of the second half of last year, everyone's attention was on impeachment, and we had to fight to get the airtime and the attention of our bosses to talk about the campaign. And then we had a few months of the campaign, and now we have this incredible tragedy. And we don't know how long this will run. And we've already seen it bleed into the campaign, as impeachment did, by forcing now at least 6 states to reschedule their primaries. We think by the end of today, Puerto Rico might join them. So we'll have 6 states and a territory that have rescheduled their primaries. And in the midst of all that, the field is basically shrunk to 2. Tulsi Gabbard today finally got out of the way. And I say finally because a lot of people questioned why she was still in this. Mike Bloomberg ended up with more delegates than she did, but she's gone and has endorsed Joe Biden. And so we're down to Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden.
And we'll get to all of that. When did your bosses take you off the road?
So I spent last Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday in Detroit and Cleveland. Detroit because of the Michigan primary. And then we went to Cleveland because Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden were supposed to do events last Tuesday night in Ohio ahead of the primary. We got to Cleveland. We were ready to go to the Biden event. And at about 4:00 that afternoon, both of them canceled their events on the advice of the state, asking people to stop holding indoor events. So we flew back from Cleveland on Wednesday. I came home. I think I came home. And then Thursday, I went up to Wilmington, Delaware to see Biden give his speech on the response to all this. Came home and have been in D.C. ever since. And couldn't tell you what.
Right, and we at Univision had to have a debate without an audience. We had to move our debate, which was last Sunday, from Phoenix. We had it all set up. It was a great debate. It was going to be heavy on immigration being in Phoenix. We had to change all the plans. One of our anchors had to go into quarantine on top of that was going to anchor the debate. So they put us all in a room here at the CNN Center. It was very weird not to have access to the candidates, to the anchors, to almost any staff whatsoever, with all the measures that were being taken at that point. But the debate went on, and now the primaries continue to go on. How are they now, both Biden and Senator Sanders, how are they campaigning?
Virtually. Essentially by using platforms like this. Both of them have taken to Facebook to hold events with supporters. Last week, Biden took some questions from voters. Actually, I guess it was Sunday night. Had about 38,000 people apparently join him over Facebook Live. Bernie Sanders has always had a more robust online presence and essentially his own, broadcasting team that has been able to produce very well presented video, productions and broadcasts from the rallies to a town hall meeting he held with his campaign manager the other night from his home in Burlington. And that, they say, had about 5 million viewers collectively. But we think the Sanders campaign is very good at inflating some of their crowd numbers.
How are we as journalists are able now to cover those campaigns virtually and have to take some of their word for it? We can't see the audience. We cannot be present. We cannot feel the room. We don't know why people are saying and how enthusiastic or not they are in terms of the reception of the candidates. So how can we move forward covering this these primaries?
We are lurking in the dark with a blindfold over our eyes, hoping we don't hit the walls right now. It's a really big adjustment, and it's going to be very difficult going forward, I think, to assess if this remains a two-person race for a while, which it may not. What Democratic voters are thinking. I think one of the and for example, Tuesday night with the three big primaries, Arizona, Florida, Illinois, they're massive states.
Right.
And can tell us a lot about what the country is thinking about things. The networks couldn't do the traditional exit polling, where people stand outside select polling sites and try to talk to people, because we agreed, because of coronavirus, it would be foolish and dangerous to put people out there to talk to people. So we had to do polling in the days leading up to Election Day to give us some sense of what people in those three states thought. And we don't even know if that was necessarily an accurate measure. Mm-hmm. So, and of course, exit polling has been panned for years by people who don't think it's trustworthy or accurate. I tend to differ, but that was a real problem. So it's going to be a real adjustment. And it's a lot of texting and calling sources. It's a lot of watching these events now closely and trying to see peripherally through your own Facebook and Twitter feeds whether people are, watching these things, absorbing them, and how it might affect people's decision to turn out and vote in the coming weeks.
Right. So prior to coronavirus, we were supposed to be here to talk about what happened after Super Tuesday. So let's talk about what happened at Super Tuesday and after then. How did we, with such a diverse group of candidates, end up with two white men in their 70s?
Well, it's because of what happened on what I call Silly Sunday and Manic Monday leading up to Super Tuesday. The fact that you had Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Beto O'Rourke so quickly fall in line behind Biden and give him a huge boost of momentum and support, and a symbolic, at least, signal that a big chunk of the party was ready for this to be over and wanted to do everything it could to stop Bernie Sanders. And it worked. I mean, for the rest of his life, no matter what, Joe Biden owes Beto O'Rourke, Pete Buttigieg, and Amy Klobuchar whatever they want, because especially in the case of Klobuchar, we think, it really made the difference for him in places like Minnesota. And, I've been asked a lot, especially as someone who's also Latino, why is it that a party that had such a huge diverse field could end up this way? My argument is what a lot of people point out. Just because you're a Black voter or a Latino voter or a woman doesn't mean you're going to naturally align with the woman or the Black or brown person in the race. If that were the case, the numbers would have been very different. I think a voter is a voter is a voter.
Right.
And on the margin.
But we like to see our country as a progressive country, as a country who's ready for a woman president, for a gay president. Even President Trump, he said, I would vote for a gay person. He said this on one of the conservative radio shows, that he wouldn't be opposed to that. So why couldn't we give this minority candidates a shot?
Well, I would argue that they were given a shot,
or a bigger shot, I guess.
Well, because the voters just, decided. It's a question for voters.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a question for you and me. I think that's a question for people who were giving money and who were showing up to events and who ultimately told pollsters and voted the way that they did. The candidates can turn around and blame you and I and say that we didn't give them enough airtime, or that we weren't fair to them because they're a woman, or because they're too young, or because they're Latino, or because they're a mayor and not a governor. Look, this is a marketplace of ideas. And it also requires you to present yourself as somebody that the majority of the voters think could do the job. And the one thing that the 24 other Democratic contenders don't have, or didn't have, is the universal name recognition that Joe Biden enjoys, and the generally universal name recognition that Bernie Sanders has, having done this 4 years ago, plus the indisputable experience of serving alongside a president that most Democrats still love for 8 years.
Right.
And that's part of what put him in this position.
And then we had Mayor Bloomberg, who tried to buy that name
Yeah.
recognition in places that he may have not had it, and tried to buy his way into this election. Why did he fall so flat-footed?
I think because he wasn't prepared to answer the accusations that Elizabeth Warren threw at him in that Las Vegas debate. He didn't have a good answer for the way he had treated women and for the fact that he was so wealthy and was doing what he was doing at a time when polling has now shown us a majority of at least Democratic primary voters didn't think that that was fair. And people will say, well, then how come you covered him so much? And did he really deserve that coverage? Couldn't you have been spending time covering other candidates? And our argument is sure, and we did when they got in, but the opportunity to do what he did had always been out there, which was to skip those first 4 states and try to put all your eggs on the Super Tuesday basket. But we always knew it would require a lot of money. He took the chance to experiment with that possibility. Therefore, it merited coverage, which he got up until the moment he lost. And I said to people, I said, this is either going to be the campaign and the strategy that ends the first 4 primaries tradition, or the most expensive gamble in American politics. And that's what it ended up being.
Right. One of our students had a question exactly as to what does this tell us about those first 4 states? Are they necessary? And did Michael Bloomberg teach us anything moving forward on the participation of being able to participate in those 4 states? Do we have to participate? Do we not? He didn't, but then did it really hurt him or help him? Nothing is really clear on that end.
No, except that there appeared to be real interest in him in New Hampshire. So you wonder if he had been participating in at least New Hampshire and Nevada and South Carolina, maybe not Iowa. Iowa requires like a year's worth of preparation to do it right, as Joe Biden can now tell you. But if he had participated in the early primary states, I actually think he may have pushed Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden down even further in the rankings and may have ended up much more of a factor. New Hampshire voters are keen to like a guy like Bloomberg, an executive, a straight talking guy, someone who is successful. That works in New England. It works in New Hampshire. It might have worked in Nevada and South Carolina, maybe less South Carolina, definitely probably in Nevada. And there was evidence it could have worked there too. But that was his decision. It was an expensive gamble, and it is what it is.
It is what it is. Let's talk about Warren. What happened to Elizabeth Warren? Why couldn't she, in the end, get off the ground? And why did she fall so far behind?
Based on my reporting, based on my observations, it was the fact that she, like other candidates before her, whiffed when it came to the issue of healthcare. You either had to be all in for what Bernie was proposing, or very clearly have some kind of an alternative. You know, Biden's alternative is Affordable Care Act plus public option.
Right.
Status quo with the one thing that the Affordable Care Act got passed without, that they wanted, which was the public option. Or Medicare for all. Buttigieg did a very good job of branding something right down the middle. Medicare if you need it. Medicare for all who need it, or whatever he called it. Either way, it worked. It was very clearly a down the middle alternative to what Bernie and Biden were proposing. Warren started the year basically with Bernie and then started to waffle, understanding that the politics were such that she was going to get boxed in on the issue as Bernie has been. And Kamala Harris had the same problem. Beto O'Rourke had a similar problem. Elizabeth Warren had a similar problem. The other issue for her, a lot of what we've come to know about her and see now, that personality, the conversation about her Oklahoma upbringing, frankly, some of the humor that we saw on Saturday Night Live wasn't there. That is not meant to be sexist, because I'm sure there's some of you who are immediately thinking that. It's that she wasn't necessarily being genuine. Because which of these is Elizabeth Warren? Is it the lady who can?
That's the problem. That's what I heard too from a lot of voters. You couldn't figure out who she really was.
Yeah, yeah.
She was a Stonewall lady who had a message to give, who gave her message very well. She was very well spoken, great debater. But then who is Elizabeth Warren? What does her heart say? And she couldn't get through a lot of voters. There was no personability.
Well, I wouldn't call it Stonewall. There was personality, because if you went to her events and listened to her speech, as I was paid to do, and I'm paid to do with all these guys, you would hear conversation about her early upbringing, being a woman from Oklahoma who got married young, who had kids, who got divorced, who moved to the East Coast, and the struggles of being a working mom and a professional woman who remarried. That was all there, but it didn't come until a little later in the campaign, and you're right, didn't necessarily transcend. A guy like Andrew Yang, for example, who probably going into this knew he wasn't necessarily going to win, but at least was being his authentic self, I think worked. Amy Klobuchar, she's being her authentic self the whole time. She's schmaltzy. She's very good on the debate stage. She's unapologetically moderate. And never waffled in what exactly she stood for. And ultimately, she did better than Warren. So I think that the lesson over and over again is you have to present yourself as yourself. You can't package yourself into something else.
Right. And we have two great candidates who are really presenting themselves as they are, both Biden and Senator Sanders. And we are getting some questions from you, so keep them coming. I'm going to post them now. But I want to get us to what happened after Super Tuesday. We had Florida, Illinois, Arizona. We also had, correct me if I'm wrong, what other states have voted? My mind is...
we had Florida, Arizona, Illinois. We had...
I was supposed to vote. That got postponed.
I was supposed to vote, yeah.
Michigan, right? No, Michigan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a very good gauge of where things could be headed in November. And
we are at a point, and here, obviously, at Univision, we have been looking very closely at the Latino vote and how Latinos have been making their voices heard during this primary election. And we have noticed by leaps and bounds that Biden has that support, not Biden, I'm sorry, Bernie Sanders has that support of the youth Latino community, also the Mexican American community. Florida's another story. We can get into the Cuba and how he was talking about Fidel Castro and no one advised him to shut up on that. So we can get to that a little later. So we are very interested to see, and we heard Joe Biden telling those young people and young voters, I got you, I understand where you're coming from, I hear you, trying to lure them in. But for the Latino community, can that really work? Can Joe Biden be a candidate that can get the Latinos, the sleepy giant, we call it every 4 years, a sleepy giant is going to wake up. It has been, not snoring anymore with Bernie Sanders, and he was getting people out to the voting centers. And now we really don't know what's going to happen with this electorate, especially.
Yeah, he's winning their parents and their abuelos. The problem is he's not winning like the under 40 crowd.
Right.
And if the Democratic Party believes it needs to get everyone, then he's got some work to do. If the Biden campaign believes that they can do this and not necessarily have to lean on younger Latinos, on liberal voters as much, then he won't necessarily have to devote time and attention to it. So they're going to have a
possible Latino VP candidate, and he has to be a woman. Now he said that he will pick a woman. I cannot honestly think of a woman Latina that would fill those shoes necessarily. I don't know if you have any ideas of who it could be. I don't, off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone. But can a Latina bring that vote since he already has the African-American vote? Why would he need a VP candidate who's African-American? I'm thinking Kamala Harris. Who could be that Latina that could fill in those shoes? And
the two names I hear who are Latina who come up are the New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham
Mm-hmm.
and then Nevada Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. Two interesting
Two
women.
very interesting characters. Mastos is fairly new in the
Right,
scene.
right.
And Lujan left Congress and went to New Mexico. I don't think she has the name recognition that Biden maybe look, and not in the Latino community anyways.
Certainly not. Certainly not. Neither of them do. The other potential.
Neither of them speak Spanish.
There you go. Which, let's remember, in fairness, is not a barrier to entry.
Exactly.
But, is something that, to a lot of Latinos and non-Latinos is seen as important. And the only other woman I've heard come up who's Latina is Veronica Escobar, the congresswoman from Texas. But that wouldn't get you anything necessarily, because you might win her district, but you wouldn't necessarily expect to win Texas, at least not yet. Maybe if the numbers continue to change, it's possible. So you're looking probably at, an African-American woman or a handful of white women. And you're right. Will that inspire the kind of people that you need?
Do you think Amy Klobuchar would be in the mix?
She's definitely in the mix. You have her, you have Kamala Harris, you have Elizabeth Warren, who did, in some polling at least, decently with those same group of people that like Bernie Sanders. You have Congresswoman Val Demings from the Orlando area gets mentioned. Former Orlando police chief, African-American, was an impeachment manager, a moderate, gun-carrying congresswoman from a critical piece of Florida, Central Florida, which is basically where every presidential campaign is fought in the Sunshine State. You've heard others like the two senators from New Hampshire, Jeanne Shaheen and Maggie Hassan, but again, I don't know what that brings you. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. And of course, Stacey Abrams, the former Georgia State Senate Minority Leader. Susan Rice, the former Obama National Security Advisor. That's essentially the beginnings, at least, of your universe.
Right.
I wonder, though, if this situation we're now in doesn't cry out for someone that, or some aspect of your experience that Biden will have to consider. He's going to have to consider youth, ability to do the job, that person's health, and certainly professional experiences. And now you wonder if there isn't something that emerges from this tragedy that compels him to make a statement with it. But either way, as he said, it's going to be a woman, and it's going to be fascinating.
How soon do you think we'll get that choice?
Sorry, I'm still here. It'll obviously be before the convention in July.
If we have a convention.
If you have an in-person convention.
In-person convention.
But I actually think if we're coming out of this, and knock on wood that we are, if we're coming out of this in, say, a month and a half, 2 months, don't be surprised if, as that happens, he suddenly announces his pick. That they may see this as an opportunity to sort of help reset things as the country starts to literally come out of their homes and re-engage in society. There's been some chatter about that. If not, then it's probably not till late June.
And with that, we answered Tyler's question, but I want to move on to Richard's question. And that is, do you think that the media was obsessed about Bloomberg's money to the exclusion of his lack of likability and troubling past women blacks? And do you think that the likability trumped nearly everything else regarding Warren? Now, we discussed Warren's likability a bit, but I don't think that we were so obsessed with Bloomberg's money. The issues of race and his issues with his past with women, we cover that. And especially when he came up on the debate stage, when Warren pressed him on it with the NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. I think we, as I speak for Univision and for my colleagues that I would watch on TV, we did a fair job.
Yeah, I think the problem, other campaigns certainly would have liked us to focus on that stuff sooner and more often. And that's fair. But remember, because he was working on a different schedule, one that essentially didn't begin until March 3rd, and we had 4 early contests to cover, you had to sit there every day and decide, is this the day we do a Bloomberg story, or do we have to cover the latest twist and turn in Iowa. We had that conversation 4 to 5 days out of the week in January and February. We wanted to do more on Bloomberg, and not just his money, but why he was doing it this way, who exactly was a Bloomberg voter, what about these things from his past, like stop and frisk. But you had to deal with the immediate, which was that the Iowa caucus was being held, that there were changes happening, but that's a journalism discussion that goes on all sorts of issues every single day.
And I think we're also trying to explore, how the money played into this election. So we're all trying to cover, well, this is a great experiment. So let's see and figure out ourselves, how do we cover a candidate who we see on TV from our homes, but is not really on the race just yet. So there were a lot of moving elements to cover this candidacy. Money played a big part of.
Yes. The money aspect, I would argue, again, had to be covered because, again, nobody had ever done it this way. And there was the potential that it was going to work. And that would have been as much of a statement as it's proven to be that it didn't work. And so, and by doing that, it was essentially sparking the argument that many voters have had with each other in their own mind of, is it right to have somebody who can spend that kind of money so quickly and try to, fund an election? And I think, it played out the way it did. But everyone had always said, sure, somebody could come in and try to do it this way, but it's going to require billions of, hundreds of millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. Well, somebody showed up with that money and tried it, and he failed, and essentially proved it's darn near impossible to pull it off.
To buy an election. Let me ask you another question. Do you think Senator Sanders' Jewish identity has been erased throughout this primary? And if so, why? That is true. We don't talk about his identity, but he doesn't talk about it either.
He doesn't talk about himself at all.
He doesn't. And he said so, that he doesn't want to, that he's just a very private person, that this is not, he's here to talk about ideas and what he wants the country to be like moving forward, but he doesn't see himself and his personal story as one that can be of any insight, or I don't know.
Well, this is an interesting element of him and how he's covered, because as you know, as you said, he's a very private person, doesn't like discussing himself. In that big 60 Minutes interview he did, he batted away questions repeatedly about himself. I don't necessarily think that that's fair, because if we're going to sit here and discuss how certain other candidates didn't show us enough of their personality or aren't being their true self, he should be too. But one way that his team was able to get him to share a little more about himself was in some very specific micro-targeting he did last year in Iowa first to Latino voters. Mm-hmm. In Des Moines and in Muscatine, a small town on the Mississippi River, where there's a large or notable cluster of Latino residents. His team's first piece of campaign mail that was sent to any Iowa voter was to these Latino households. And the story on the placard that was sent out, or the brochure, was about his family's immigrant experience and history, the fact that his father had come from Poland. And the message in Spanglish was, I know what you're going through, because my family did it too. We came from Europe, you've come from Mexico, maybe you've come from Central America, but I know what it is like to move to this kind of country. He didn't immigrate with him, but
that ad is, I targeted ads on Pandora. Yeah. And when I listen to my Pandora, that ad is there in Spanish over and over and over again. And that's the only time that you've heard, or that I had heard him talk about his story, his personal immigration story.
Right. And that's one of the few ways they've gotten him to talk about his background. I think it was telling that one of the most effective attack lines Mike Bloomberg ever used against any of his opponents was calling out the fact that Sanders owns 3 homes in Vermont in that first debate. And did you see how quickly and angrily he snapped back at Bloomberg for bringing it up? Right. Well, I have the place in Washington and the one in Burlington, and then like many Vermonters, I have a cabin. I thought to myself, I got family in Vermont. None of them own a second home. That was news to me. Right. And I think it was a reminder that in some ways, maybe there are aspects of his life that haven't been explored enough, while others have been. Biden makes the argument he's the most vetted of the group, and he wishes that his other opponents had been explored as deeply as he has. But, you know, these are struggles that we have every day in journalism. And it's not because we're all sitting around going, well, let's not talk about that because that would be too unfair to him. It's not bias.
Well, since we're on this, since we're talking about senators, Senator Sanders and his past and his story, let's talk about the Cuba Sandinista Fidel Castro story. And that's one that we cover to nauseam here at Univision, because obviously it impacts our viewers. It impacts we have a great viewership in South Florida that was all up in arms. I don't know if you saw the images of Cubans going down Calle Ocho, a very significant and historical street. They had a little anti-Sanders rally down there. So it really upset a lot of people. And me being Cuban personally, I had a lot of conversations with colleagues and friends about this and about his comments. From my point of view, this is something that he feels. He's been saying it for the past 30 plus years. This is not him changing his mind in any way. He's just repeating what he truly feels and how he truly feels. But isn't there a campaign advising him that there is a sector of the population that he needs to have the votes from that will be highly offended by these comments? And he needs Florida to get to the White House. And without Florida, he will be in a tough situation. And without that Cuban American vote, that Venezuelan vote, that Nicaraguan vote in South Florida, it will be a hard road ahead.
That whole incident, I think, exposed the limitations of Sanders' ability to win the nomination, because you're right. Even if there were people around him who said that, he would have said, I don't care. This is what I believe. This is what I've always believed. And to toggle off of that opinion would not be true to the consistent message and belief.
How about to just quiet that opinion?
Well, it didn't matter, because
he repeated it for
if Anderson Cooper hadn't asked him in late February, early March, he would have been asked about it once he was the nominee over the summer.
Right.
Or the Trump campaign would have started running ads about it against him, and he would have been forced into it. It was inevitable. And I think it just very quickly reminded people who have been very worried about electability, who can defeat the president. Next to healthcare, that's been the biggest concern of Democrats. But they, just like you said, Janet, would have realized, wait a second, you can't talk that way in Florida and expect to win. Therefore, we won't win Florida. Therefore, we won't win the White House. Therefore, I can't support Sanders. I mean, that is the calculation that a lot of Democratic primary voters, especially in the early states, had. So, you know, it was clearly, in some cases, detrimental. Clearly, it was in Florida. And you know, but that's him being his true self and not caring.
Right. Now, I think the bigger question is this, this is trying to equate this, is the Sanders Cuban comment as detrimental as it would be for the Biden campaign not to get the Latino vote if he's the nominee?
Yeah, I think so. And Biden still he's going to need another round with Jorge to talk about the Obama immigration legacy.
Jorge Ramos being our main anchor over at Univision.
Yeah, and I say Jorge because it's Jorge who always brings this issue up with him and with a lot of the other candidates and really presses them on it, justifiably so. Because only once he got to Nevada in his conversation with Jorge did he finally concede that, maybe we didn't do it right. Well, so now you're clearly changing your thoughts on this because you were quite defensive about it all last year.
And just to remind those who are tuning in and who are joining us, because we know a lot of politics and the background of what we're talking about. During the Obama administration, there was the numbers of deportations rose to a historic level, to the point that Obama was nicknamed the deportator in chief within the Hispanic community, and that became a huge deal. So now, yes, we have President Trump. Deportations are high, but they're still not nearly as high as it was back during the Obama-Biden years, and many Latino community activists, especially the youth, who the dreamers, youth who are here undocumented, feel that they cannot in any way support Vice President Biden because he has a terrible record with Latinos, even though he was a Democrat, even though he's very progressive, would support DACA and so on. But the deportations is something that they cannot put aside. They cannot in any way pardon that Obama-Biden administration for, because they did deport many, many, many thousands of undocumented immigrants. And that's the conversation we're having.
Yeah, and it's going to be a real challenge for him, especially in Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, Texas, with immigrant communities and with those younger voters who may know of relatives or coworkers or neighbors who got caught up in that, if not during the Obama years, then certainly more recently.
Definitely. Let's go to another question. As president, Trump will naturally get a lot of press coverage in the next few months. If Biden or Sanders cannot hold events, go out amongst the people, what kind of strategies can they use to get the press coverage that I assume they would need to go on and with the presidency?
Yeah, it's we're asking that question every day. Not only that, but then how do we cover it?
Yeah.
And can we really cover it? Should we be covering it at a time when so many Americans are now sick, dying, or at risk of getting ill? And if not that, then feeling the incredible economic effects of all of this. So we'll see. They've got to figure that out. We ask every day, what's the plan for today? What are you doing? What, if anything, are you doing? In the case of the Biden campaign, they've managed to find a way sort of every day to drip out that somebody else has endorsed them. Mm-hmm. Today it was Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York. Some might wonder what took her so long, but so that potentially buys them some press in the New York newspapers ahead of the April 28th primary in New York. The other day it was some other lawmaker from some other state, and so that's one way, at least at a local level, potentially to generate some attention. But they're going to have to find a way, if not to counter program the president, then to at least get their thoughts out there about how they think this is all going. And you can armchair quarterback this, but I don't know for how long.
Yeah, we truly hadn't seen the president so public in any emergency really until this time. We're seeing him every day in that briefing room. He doesn't need to be campaigning. He is present. He is in the Americans' living room every single day. We at Univision, we're carrying those press conferences every day live as they're happening. So you're seeing the president. You're not going to forget about him. He is here. He's present. Yes, he may not be filling 20,000 people stages anymore, but he's there. He doesn't need to be out in the campaign on the trail, and he knows that this can help him politically as well.
Yeah, and look, this is either going to go really badly for the president, or it could go really well for him. Mm-hmm. If coming out of this, the economic rebound and the national sort of desire to get beyond this is so strong that he is seen as sort of helping to rally the recovery. But as with everything else, the president can be his own worst enemy. And so if Biden or Sanders, whoever it is, it looks like it's going to be Biden just from a mathematical standpoint, is just kind of there and stays out of the way for the next few weeks and either lets the president toil through this or have, just general public opinion about it sink his prospects, then Biden may want to resist the chance to do himself harm, which he's also prone to do, and just sort of stay out of it for now.
But then again, it's only March. So right, what will be the October surprise? Where are we going to be 6 months down the line when people actually have to vote for a president? We always, it just has been a crazy election cycle and a crazy presidency. So we continue to say, oh, will they remember impeachment? Who's talking about impeachment? Who's talking about Russia, meddling in the elections? Who's talking about Mueller? Who remembers any of this?
Right.
Are we going to remember coronavirus come October? I don't know.
I would think we're going to remember this one because it's
I
going to be
think we
something
would
far
too.
worse.
But in terms of political political coverage, you know, I think we'll have been, all of our lives are so upended that we will definitely remember these days for many years to come. But at the ballot box, are we going to remember?
I don't know. I think you're right about impeachment, though. It does feel awfully distant and insignificant compared to all the, and academic, frankly, compared to this very vivid and real situation. Now, obviously, it raised some serious questions and concerns, many of them rooted in the fact that Biden is the Democratic nominee. So in many ways, it may come back. But you're right. Things are moving so quickly. If you and I had sat down together in Iowa 6 months ago and said, first they're going to impeach him, and then there's going to be a global pandemic, and we won't be talking about this campaign, you wouldn't have believed this.
No.
Because how can you predict this?
No. Another question. What do you think would be a potential Biden cabinet, and what would it look like? Do you think he will tap for some, who do you think he would tap for some secretary roles? So who are some people that you think are close enough?
I think about this a lot differently than other people do, because a lot of people like to sit there and sort of cast the show and think, oh, well, you know, Buttigieg could do this and Andrew Yang could do that, and he'll bring back these people from now. You got to remember one thing, and one thing primarily, before you do any of this. Who will control the Senate next January, and by how much? Because remember, you need a majority, and you're going to need a Senate that's willing to not only vote on your nominees, but also to hold confirmation hearings for them and to not make that nominee's life miserable in the process. So if Democrats win back the Senate and they've got like 52, 53 seats, well, okay, you can probably send most of your Democratic wish list nominees to the Senate and have them confirmed pretty quickly. But if the Senate is still controlled by Republicans and it's still in this sort of 52-48, 53-47 universe, that makes the calculation much more difficult for Joe Biden. So you got to start with that. That said, looking at people who could be involved, certainly some of his former rivals. It would be a way to sort of acknowledge that the party went through this together, that some of these people proved to him that they're qualified to do certain things. I think if she isn't vice president, Amy Klobuchar could make a very good attorney general, for example. Others say Sally Yates, who was ousted by President Trump, could come back and lead the Justice Department. But again, do you want to make that political statement of saying that the woman that was displaced by the past president should now run the department, or does that reopen wounds that the country may be trying to move on from? You'll probably see people like Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington, who's dealing quite terribly now with he isn't dealing with it terribly, but with the terrible situation in Washington state, has made climate change a big concern of his. So potentially he's somebody who could be EPA administrator or Secretary of the Interior, or maybe some other executive role. I'll also be looking to see if there's any Republican that he could tap for, if not a senior and prominent position, but at least one or two to sort of acknowledge that, look,
do you see anyone from this current cabinet staying on?
No.
Unless secretary level?
Unless we're in a situation where, for continuity's sake,
right,
he needs to ask like the defense secretary to hold on for a few weeks. I certainly don't see Bill Barr or Mike Pompeo being asked to stay on, or Wilbur Ross or Betsy DeVos. I mean, I don't think any of them really.
Carranza maybe over at SBA.
Maybe, but that's it.
That's a big maybe. And what is this? What do you think about the Tom Friedman idea of announcing a cabinet now?
Yeah, I mean, those are the kinds of things that Biden's going to have to consider as we come out of all this. You still there? Yeah. That is one of the things he's going to have to consider coming out of this mess. Is does it make sense to make those kinds of bold announcements early in an effort to sort of show the country? And you probably do this in a situation, especially with the president's campaigning from a position of weakness. This is what your government would look like. If you like this, then voters in Colorado and Maine and Georgia and North Carolina and Michigan take this to heart when you have to think about who you're voting for in the Senate. And for the rest of you across the country, this is what your cabinet would look like. Therefore, vote for me. It would be similar to like what the current president did when he issued his Supreme Court list. Yeah. Democrats are less prone to do that kind of thing because that's just not in their nature, and they don't like the overt politicization of the Supreme Court. Although that may change. But doing something like, here's who I would probably put on my cabinet, works. The risk, however, is that if the Biden campaign hasn't properly vetted all those people, we will.
Trouble.
And we may find some things in their past that then require the Biden campaign to remove those people from the list and create some real big PR headaches for them.
It will be really messy. Let's talk about that down ballot. Now we're talking about the Senate and how it could shape up come November. And when Michael Bloomberg went on CBS on that big interview he did with 60 Minutes, at the end of that piece, I keep coming back to it because he said, what is at stake, really? It's not only the presidency, it's the Senate, it's the House, it's federal judges around the country for years and years to come, and it is the Supreme Court too. It's a big reality. And he said that if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, he cannot probably keep the House or the Senate, and many of the and he would basically give President Trump the presidency, and that's what's at stake. Do you think that's correct, that Sanders is so radical that he may hurt the down ballot if he becomes the nominee?
I think it's a fair point. Some of those most vulnerable.
And I think we just lost Ed. But yes, that's the point that that Michael Bloomberg was saying, that some of the most vulnerable, and I'll make that point for Ed while he connects right back, some of the most vulnerable districts tend to be moderate, and they would not want a candidate such as Bernie Sanders to come in and have,
I'm back.
There you are. Radical ideas. I was making the point that some of those vulnerable districts may not want a candidate like Sanders with radical ideas that they cannot endorse, because the population in those very moderate districts would not get behind them.
The two best examples of that were the ones that spoke out as quickly and forcefully after the Sanders 60 Minutes interview down in Miami. Debbie Murkisel Powell and Donna Shalala, who represent the two Miami area swing districts, and very quickly said, he's the nominee. I can't back him necessarily. Don't agree with him on this issue. Going to make my life miserable. Right. And that's totally fair. From an economic standpoint,
like Senator Menendez in New Jersey, who's not necessarily a vulnerable district, came out against that.
Yes. No, the way that comment and that issue so quickly demonstrated the potential divide in the party, I think, again, was so detrimental to Sanders, not only on the Cuba issue and the Florida issue, but on the broader electability issue and the argument that Biden and Bloomberg made especially, which was that this only works if we have a Democratic Congress backing us up, and Sanders isn't the guy to do that. And I think it's telling that shortly after that, Biden got some endorsements from a lot of those Democratic freshmen, Connor Lamb out of Pittsburgh, Elaine Lurie out of Virginia.
Debbie herself endorsed him.
Debbie, eventually. Colin Allred from Dallas, who know that at the top of the ticket above them requires a candidate like Biden in order to prevail. And he, to his credit, one of the more effective lines he had, even when he was doing terribly in Iowa, was, think about it, folks. Who are Democrats going to want to come into a place like North Carolina or Arizona or Georgia or Colorado or Maine later this year and campaign alongside their presidential candidate? It's me, it's not Bernie. And I think that's an argument that definitely resonated with a lot of these Democrats.
What is Bernie to do?
He is home. He got home last night with his wife, Janet, and or Jane, sorry.
Jane, yeah.
You know that he held a meeting today with some of his advisors, at least a phone meeting, to talk about next steps. I was told by a senior aide earlier today that it doesn't necessarily mean that a final decision is imminent, but that, be ready for the possibility that in the next 10 days or so, he may announce that he's on his way out in some way.
Well, you heard him cursing yesterday here when he entered the Senate.
I think
What accent?
That moment, God bless Manu Raju for asking him the way he did. That moment and the moment when Bloomberg brought up the three houses, I think are the most reflective of the real Bernie Sanders. This is a guy who, when things aren't going well for him, has a very short fuse. And I've seen it in interviews to some extent myself.
And that's detrimental because people don't want.
That's it. Short temper isn't unique to Bernie. Biden has it. Trump has it too. But you don't see it that often.
Wouldn't Bernie and Trump be one of the same on each side? Many people say that.
Yeah. In terms of their mannerisms, in terms of their ability to take criticism, in terms of what they think about the media and how they treat the media to some extent. Yes, they possess similar characteristics. Let's put it that way.
And do you see another question from our listeners here? Do you see a place for Mike Bloomberg in a Biden cabinet or administration?
Possibly, but not as Treasury Secretary.
Okay.
Some have said maybe as Secretary of State, or maybe because he actually, like Biden, has pretty decent connections around the world, given that he's been able to give out a lot of his money, but also because he was mayor of New York. The other one people have mentioned as a possibility is the United Nations ambassador. And, if not that, maybe some other kind of diplomatic role. But yeah, it's been talked about. And I think,
people saying that Michelle Obama may be the vice presidential nominee.
I mean, look, Democrats have been saying all along she'd be the perfect nominee. Certainly it would probably be a pretty sweet.
Interested in running, is she?
No, they have made very clear. She's
not interested in running. She said that leaving the White House. She said that at the White House.
She said it on her book tour.
Yeah.
So
that's definitely not happening. I wanted to get through a few more questions before we get that we have. Do you think what do you think the conventions are going to look like come the summertime? And I know it's very hard to predict because we don't know what will be this summer.
Yeah, we don't. I think it depends on how Sanders decides to carry out his campaign over the next few weeks. And whether he lingers to try to extract some kind of concession from the party or from Biden in terms of policy. And a lot of that will just dictate how it all goes. He may realize that in the interest of party unity and in the midst of this problem, that it makes more sense to get out and maybe get some kind of assurance from Biden that he'll do or believe or campaign on something. We'll see. Otherwise, it could be chaotic and could be similarly awkward and sour as it was 4 years ago. For the president, for now at least, we're anticipating a 4-day coronation in Charlotte. I think what will be more interesting is what's happening off the convention floor in Charlotte and who is already angling for 2024 beyond Vice President Pence.
Do you see Biden as being a one-term president if he gets elected?
I think if we've learned anything in the last few weeks, if we've learned anything in the last few years, we should make those kinds of predictions. Certainly we entertain those questions all the time, but I don't know.
Yeah. And I was last time around, President Trump did get about 20% of the Sanders vote. That people were very upset because Sanders was not the nominee. Do you think that could be, I know Sanders has gone on and on to support, to say that he would support the nominee, in this case being Vice President Biden, that the point here, the goal is to defeat President Trump, that there's just no other way. So trying to unite the party. But do you think in the end, we will see another phenomenon like that of people just being so upset that if it's not Sanders, they will go ahead and vote for President Trump?
Yes, but I think with like everything that Sanders has done this time, it'll be a smaller percentage than last time because enough people who don't like President Trump understand, and again, this isn't me, this is based on reporting, this is based on what we've heard from people, that the best thing to do would be to vote, to do whatever is necessary to defeat the president. And if that means holding your nose and voting for Joe Biden, I think there's a larger percentage than last time of Sanders supporters who will do that because they understand what's at stake. And if they prefer the perfect to be the enemy of the good, then that's just who they are, and that's fine. But everything has pointed to the likelihood that the percentage of Sanders voters that would do that is smaller than before. And I think that also speaks to the fact that, as if it weren't obvious to everyone, Joe Biden isn't Hillary Clinton. That a lot of what Sanders enjoyed 4 years ago wasn't necessarily about Sanders. It was about the fact that he wasn't Hillary Clinton.
Right. Do you think the economy is still playing a big role come November? Especially,
I think it'll play. I think it now will play an even bigger role.
More than ever.
Yeah. Absolutely.
With this, some people have been saying, well, if the president starts sending out this economic packages and this stimulus and sending out checks to the American people, he can, that's another way to tell them, I got your back, vote for me because I have your money. I am going to keep you, on a job, on that, whatever it may be that your needs are. I'm here, the one helping you. Is that how you see it too, that this could be a good campaign measure, not only a political measure or the right measure to help the American people in a time of crisis, but also in an election year, something savvy to do politically?
Oh, it's certainly not only designed to prop up the economy immediately, people are clearly desperate, but it is political. The fact that what they call phase 2 passed in the Senate yesterday with only, I think it was 7 no votes from Republicans is a sign, and very little debate.
Mm-hmm.
That happened because McConnell basically told his conference, hold your nose and vote for this, because we cannot afford a debate over this, both from a practical and a political standpoint right now.
And now even McConnell is proposing, from what we saw today, even bigger checks than the one that the Treasury Department is proposing.
Yeah, exactly. So, there again, and even more so, has to do it knowing that he has to get at least 7 Democratic votes. So he's going to have to tuck in some Democratic priorities. And again, it will happen with very little resistance. Now, a year from now, 2 years from now, 4 years from now, what is the political echo of this? How does it shape the 2022 elections and the 2024 elections, the way TARP did in 2010 with the Tea Party revolution, or the way the Patriot Act votes did for so long after 9/11, remains to be seen, and will be a fascinating aspect of all of this as we go forward.
And what is President Trump electability? I still get a sense that he has a very good chance to win the elections.
I think it is being redrawn as we speak.
That is true.
And we won't know for certain until probably closer to Labor Day at this point. I think so much of what's happening right now.
In the summer, you give it that late. Well,
I do.
Where we are with this coronavirus.
I do, because A, we have to see that the immediate danger is gone, and B, we have to see the recovery, and C, we have to see how he comports himself through this whole thing. Does he start to do something differently in terms of how he leads and how he talks about things, or does he remain as consistent as he's been in that regard? And how does that rob American voters? We don't know yet.
And do you see, the last question before we go, do you see President Trump debating Vice President Biden?
Only once. He wants to, but he wants to do it on his terms, or at least on terms that he believes are more favorable to him.
Yeah.
And so we'll see. I suspect it will only be once or twice. I don't see them doing 3.
I get the sense that President Trump understands that Biden is a tough contender. And
I think, but see, I'd argue he thinks he's a tough contender, but an easy guy to debate.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we will see. What's your prediction? How do you see, if you had a crystal ball, not about who's going to get elected, but how do you see things will be moving forward with the campaign, come the conventions? Do you have any idea how we're going to breathe anytime soon?
I don't know. I really don't. I think what we're dealing with right now is just so incredibly disruptive, and speaks to the really tumultuous times we all live in and how quickly things can change. To even suggest that this much we know, Janet, and I even hesitate to say this: a white guy will get elected president. But it's only March.
Yeah, but it's only March, and we'll leave it at that. And hopefully, for those who are out there, stay safe. Ed, thank you so much for your time. And hopefully, we'll get to come back in the fall and talk all about this again. I know I had 2 more seminars that had to be canceled. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do them online, but I have made a commitment to you to come back in the fall for those 2 seminars. So maybe we can have Ed back and replay all of this and see where we are after the election.
I will make this commitment right now. If it's post-election, you count me in. I will be there in person. Always happy to help my alma mater.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Ed. Thank you so much for logging in, taking the time with us to spend this past hour. And please do stay safe from home. And I hope you have a great semester ahead. Bye-bye.
Take care.